This video contains major spoilers for Kung Fu Panda 4, but the movie's not very good anyway, so who cares? Anyway, Kung Fu Panda 4 is a mixed bag in the worst possible way. It's not the interesting kind with really impressive highs mixed with infuriating lows. Instead, it just stumbles back and forth between passable and below average. There were some upsides. The animation looks very nice, and it's a real technical glow-up since the franchise started 16 years ago, even though it barely has a hint of the stylization of the previous films and the action scenes aren't nearly as good. The characters are still likable, even if it feels like they're just kind of going through the motions at this point. It's funny sometimes, even if it does also reference the screaming goat meme. Do you see why this movie is so frustrating? But there are two aspects of this movie that stand out as the ultimate examples of not terrible, but not really particularly well done. Those being the return of Tai Lung and the introduction of Po's new companion, Zhen. Tai Lung went from one of the most ruthless and unstoppable villains in DreamWorks' catalog to basically just a damsel in distress. Meanwhile, the movie ditched half the franchise's core cast in favor of the latest Awkwafina performance Hollywood has shoved down our throats. Disclaimer, I don't actually dislike Awkwafina, but I can see why people are sick of seeing her everywhere, and there's not much notable about Zhen aside from the fact that it's Awkwafina playing her.
I'm a red panda.
You know what? I love that for you.
But after seeing the movie, there's one central change I feel like they could have made to the story which would have made things a hell of a lot more compelling. So to help me get to that point, let's see what the movie has given me to work with. The movie focuses on Po being forced to choose his successor as Dragon Warrior so he can become a spiritual leader. But the more pressing matter is that a sorceress named the Chameleon is attacking China, and the only person Po can turn to for help is an untrustworthy thief named Zhen. The two reluctantly go on an adventure together, slowly forming a friendship, confronting their own insecurities, and having Zhen learning to trust Po. Toward the climax, the Chameleon makes contact with the spirit realm, stealing the kung fu from the spirit of Tai Lung, among others including Gary Oldman-less Lord Shen and J.K. Simmons-less Kai. Po and Zhen take down the Chameleon, earning the respect of his former villains, including Tai Lung, and this finally leads to Po accepting his role as spiritual leader, and choosing Zhen as the new Dragon Warrior despite Master Shifu's objections. It's all a reasonably workable concept, but none of it is really explored enough. There aren't really any examples of Po learning to be a spiritual leader, and he kind of just resorts to the same tactics he's always used.
You tried it our way. Now, try it yours. Kick her butt.
His growing friendship with Zhen doesn't feel particularly genuine because there aren't many scenes of emotional vulnerability between the two. They go from begrudgingly tolerating each other to affable friends with little to no transition in between. Zhen's backstory of living on the street as a thief is given no attention, which means there's very little emotional impact to her learning to trust Po, becoming a better person, and making a better life for herself. Then there's Tai Lung, who pretty much has his entire arc and role in the story condensed into 5 minutes of screen time. So with all that in mind, what is this change I'm proposing that would help all of this? Well, first of all, remove Awkwafina altogether. I probably convinced a few of you with that alone, but let's keep going. If Po doesn't have Zhen, who's he supposed to go on this journey with? Who's he supposed to bond with, and who's he going to mutually develop with throughout the movie? You might have figured out where I'm going with this, but here it is. Introduce Tai Lung at the beginning of the movie and make him Po's reluctant travel buddy. Just to give a hypothetical as to how that would play out, maybe have the Chameleon invade the spirit realm at the beginning of the movie instead of the end, show her fighting and stealing the kung fu of all the warriors Po has ever fought against. Have the scene mainly play out from Tai Lung's perspective, with him fighting her off only to eventually realize that even he can't defeat her. For one thing, it would be a much more threatening introduction for the Chameleon compared to just seeing her attack some not very intimidating villagers and pushing a guy down some stairs. We've seen just how practically unstoppable Tai Lung is in a fight, so to see a villain who's not only able to defeat him, but also has the abilities of all the other bad guys we've seen previously could be terrifying to witness. Anyway, Tai Lung opts to retreat, escaping the spirit realm through the portal the Chameleon opened, and knowing that she's going to try to conquer China and most likely come after him in the process, he swallows his pride and goes to Po for help. And this is where I think the dynamic between Po and Tai Lung could have a massive edge over Zhen. For one thing, unlike Zhen, who needs to have an entire character and backstory established from scratch, which the movie didn't do a good job of anyway, Tai Lung already has those elements ready to go, and it could fit really well into a redemption arc. Remember when he first started training in Kung Fu? He was a sweet little kitten then. It was Shifu's constant praise at an impressionable age that gave him such a sense of entitlement in his later years, which ultimately led him going down such a dark path.
I loved you too much to see what you were becoming.
I think it would make for a great redemption story to see Tai Lung interacting with Po in a context outside of a 5-minute fight, and through Po's optimism and natural instinct for encouragement and helping people, it helps Tai Lung rekindle that innocence that he lost so long ago. It would also make for a great way of showing Po's journey into spiritual leader. I mean, what demonstrates that better than managing to bring out the good in a character that everyone thought was beyond saving? Plus, when you look back at Po and Tai Lung's fight from the first movie, I honestly think their interactions could transition really well into them becoming friends if given the chance. Po was essentially playing with Tai Lung throughout that fight. He's smiling and laughing throughout it, clumsily bouncing around and using whatever goofy tactics he can think of. It showed how Po was Tai Lung's polar opposite. Tai Lung became a kung fu master because he thought he was supposed to. Po did those things simply because he enjoyed it. It was fun for him and brought out the best, most capable version of himself. Imagine if Tai Lung was given the chance to properly get to know Po and he started to understand the passion that Po has and that he himself used to have. Sort of like how the Furious 5 eventually warmed up to Po after spending some time with him, and the frustration Tai Lung showed towards Po's antics from before could transition into him finding them actually somewhat endearing. It would make them becoming friends feel so much more impactful because there's so much more negative history between them that's being overcome compared to Zhen. Hell, you could even show some character development from Tai Lung in the way he fights alongside Po. Have a scene where they have to fight a horde of bad guys and combine Tai Lung's precise and brutal style of fighting with Po's looser improvisational style. Just off the top of my head, have an action scene where Tai Lung strikes Po, making him bounce all over the place, taking out a bunch of thugs. You know, it could be a great parallel to the first movie where Tai Lung would do that to try to hurt Po and it would end up backfiring on him. Except here, he's doing it in a context where he and Po are allies and it actually ends up working to his benefit. Not only that, but it could also make Po and Tai Lung's existing interactions throughout the movie much more meaningful. There's a sequence at just about the climax where Po meets a captured Tai Lung and vows to save him and everyone else, only for Tai Lung to express how much Po was fucked up by allowing things to come to this.
Oogway made a mistake choosing you as the Dragon Warrior. I just didn't realize how big a mistake it was.
If Po and Tai Lung had spent the movie bonding up until that point, it would feel like such a crushing failure for Po that after getting so close to improving Tai Lung as a person, he's lost him to the darkness once again, similar to how Shifu did all those years ago. And it would allow Tai Lung's eventual approval of Po near the end of the film to feel much more gratifying.
You aren't completely useless after all.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
One question this hypothetical rewrite raises, though, is how's the story going to end? If Zhen is nowhere to be seen, then where is Po's character arc supposed to finish? And this is kind of where I might have a few people disagreeing with me here. I think Tai Lung should be the next Dragon Warrior. Hear me out. The reason why Tai Lung was denied the title in the first movie was because Oogway saw that he wasn't morally worthy, which, yeah, he really wasn't. But if something in him were to change, say for example, he goes on a life-changing adventure with one who he believes stole his title from him, eventually learns to respect him and understands why that person was chosen instead of him, it doesn't sound like that darkness in his heart is there anymore. You could even include a scene of Tai Lung returning to the Jade Palace. It could potentially be a really cathartic moment for Shifu to see his biggest mistake corrected and for Tai Lung to reunite now that he's able to see things from a whole new perspective. And if Po was able to bring Tai Lung to that point, making him actually worthy of the title he lost and healing decades-old wounds between a father and son, I mean, that's a spiritual leader if I've ever seen one. I'm not saying that everything I've mentioned here needed to be just so in order to be a success, and I admit that the story I'm pitching here is maybe a little generalized, but I do genuinely think that if something somewhat resembling what I've suggested here were implemented, the movie would have most likely been a hell of a lot better. But if you'll permit me to make one more suggestion, because I think it's important that I say this. Don't play Baby one more time in the closing credits.
Oh, baby, how was I supposed to know?
I mean, sure, it's a good cover on its own merits, and getting Jack Black to sing the end credits song does make sense, but what the hell does a song about an ex-boyfriend have to do with Kung Fu Panda? Why does everything about this movie just barely not work? You can keep the Crazy Train cover, though. I like that one. Guys, I wasn't strong enough. I tried to save Kung Fu Panda 4, but the movie is already out. If only I could have got the word out sooner, DreamWorks would have undoubtedly listened, and I may have been appointed spiritual leader of the Kung Fu Panda creative team from here on out. I'm sorry. But even if I couldn't save them in time, you can still see my new videos even sooner by supporting me on Patreon. For just $1.50 a month, you'll get to see all my videos before they get released on YouTube. You'll also get a shout out at the end of every video, and you'll also get to see some bonus alternate thumbnails that I made while I was working on the video. Links in the description.